You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Dolly Alderton.
Writers, I have an amazing tool to tell you about. A revolutionary writing tool for planning stories. Campfire Pro is what novelists need to go from the seed of an idea to a detailed plan that's ready to be executed. Complete your character design, create a timeline, and track your world building all in one place with our downloadable desktop app for Mac and PC. Without the annoying subscription model so many apps are using today. Visit campfiretechnology.com for special holiday pricing on Campfire Pro today. Who Wants to Love a Billionaire? Billionaires in New York, Book 1 by Laura Burton. Do you have a favorite writer whose books are auto-buys for you? Wouldn't you love for readers to have you on their auto-buy list, then recommend your books to their friends and on social media? The good news is there are subtle things you can do, things that are nearly invisible to the reader that will make your stories unputdownable. The Beyond 10 Days course from Victory Editing can help you get the most from your stories and help you build that relationship with readers through your writing. This course is full of awesome, and best of all, you don't have to fly across the country or put on pants. In this course, we'll focus on avoiding info dumps, dialogue mechanics, show versus tell in dialogue, carrying show versus tell forward to your narrative, deepening your point of view and strengthening your protagonist's voice, overwriting and how to avoid it. 10 hours of video content with text and audio downloads. Shine that diamond. Join me at the Beyond 10 Days course. Go to hankgarner.com and click the banner to sign up today. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. The Feisty Heroine Romance Collection of Short Stories. Over 30 plus pulse racing shorts to capture your heart with USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and award-winning authors in the mix. Paranormal, contemporary, fantasy, and historical romance that will whet your appetite with titillating, heart-pounding tales you'll want to read again, then beg for more. Fall in love with your next book crush. Pre-order this amazing collection of shorts, over 30 pulse-pounding stories for only 99 cents.
Proceed with caution.
Buying this collection may lead to addictive reading, falling in love with your next book crush, and staying up past your bedtime to see what happens next.
Get your limited edition copy of Feisty Heroines. Look for the link in the show notes of this episode. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Dolly Alderton on the show with me. She has an amazing book. It's called Everything I Know About Love, a Memoir. It's been out in the UK for a couple of years now and has done amazing things there, and then has spawned several projects around it. And it's releasing here in the States today, as you're hearing this. So, welcome to the show, Dolly.
Thank you so much. And I must say, I think you have my favorite voice of anyone who's ever interviewed me on a podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I started to say I've worked hard on it, but I really haven't. It was just, it's just one of those things. Anyway.
Can I ask where you're from?
What's that?
Can I ask where you're from?
I am from South Mississippi, down by the Gulf Coast.
Okay, good. I thought it was around there. The more and more time that I spend in America and hang out with Americans, I'm trying to completely understand all the different accents. And yours is a particularly good one, I think.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll tell my mother that. Dolly, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory of wanting to write, I was so little. I think I was probably 5. And I think it was when my first diary entries are around the age of 5. And when I read them, they're obviously incredibly uninteresting, as the life of 5-year-olds normally are. But what I find so interesting is I remember it was less of a hobby, and it was more an absolute compulsion that I had to write down what happened during my day. And it's literally kind of for years and years and years, just lists of things I ate, or, people's pets that I met, or, what sandwich I had at lunchtime. But for me, that really defines what writing is for me, which this will sound probably quite pretentious, but it transcends any sort of kind of enjoyment or honing of skill. At the base of it, the engine that fires it up is that it's just the way that I experience life. I think it's not enough for me to have that first kind of, to just have the experience of living. I have to have it on the page as well. So that was just so early on. I had that kind of compulsion.
I don't think that's pretentious at all. That's now maybe someone whose mind is more geared towards story, maybe that makes more sense to them. But I think there's a great number of people out there that are kind of shaking their head like, yes, I understand what that compulsion is.
Yeah. And it's weird because I still have it every day, even when I'm not sitting writing. I'm currently writing a novel at the moment, but even when I have a day where I'm not writing, I still end up writing. I still end up going out for a dinner with a friend and sitting on the bus home and writing down 10 things that she said that made me laugh, or I thought was interesting, or something that she heard that I want to look into. And I can't remember a day of my life where I wasn't taking in the world or information in some way and regurgitating it into notes.
Did you grow up in a home where that sort of exercise was encouraged? Can you trace back, a beginning, to this mode of thinking, or is it just something that is just, part of Dolly?
I think my mum is very much someone who records things. Interestingly enough, just as I picked up the call to you today, I have just had a load of home videos from the 90s of childhood videos that I've just, for the first time ever, age 31, put onto DVD and started watching them the last couple of days, which is such a trippy experience. So I was literally, right before you called me, I was watching 4-year-old me doing a ballet recital in my living room. But, you know, they really did. When I'm watching these videos, my mum has an almost panicked propensity, I can see, to record everything. And she always kept books when we were growing up of funny things that we said. And that kind of whole idea of memory and retaining memory to understand experience is something I'm really exploring in my novel at the moment, hence why I'm kind of going back and watching all this stuff. So I think it's definitely, it's like a really interesting, I've never actually really thought about why I have that compulsion, but now that you ask, I think it's like an interesting brew of being someone quite nostalgic, someone quite fearful of running out of time. I'm quite fearful of death, just to keep this light in the first. Like most writers, I think I'm very aware of the passing of time, and I'm very aware of not running out of time without learning the things I want to learn and telling the stories I want to tell. And then also, you know, I did grow up in a bit of a family of hams, to be totally honest. My brother's an actor, my dad's a talker, my mum used to write a bit, and you know what we brought to the family table at home, like so many families, was who had the best story from that day. So much of this stuff, I think, is really, I do believe it is kind of in the bones of you.
Sure. Were you a bookish kid? Were there any stories that you read that you cherished, and can you trace back a love of story to some of those early discoveries?
Yeah, my mum tells, I don't really remember reading that much when I was little, but mum said I was totally obsessed. And she said that my favourite place was the local library. And every kind of week where I'd have to go back and take the books back, she said that my bottom lip would do a very particular type of wobble that would let her know I was about to go nuclear on crying. But I think what happened was, I can't really remember the classics really. I remember loving Noel Streatfeild. I was very, very heteronormative, girly little girl. I think I liked Noel Streatfeild. There's a great writer called Jacqueline Wilson, who I'm not sure if you're familiar in America, that was very important for people of my generation, that were kind of children's stories, but about very real, kind of gritty things. I liked Tolkien. Mum used to read me Harry Potter, all the kind of traditional kid stuff. And then, like most people, I read a bit when I was a teenager, and then I just discovered boys, and then it's just boys completely replaced books, really. And then, despite doing an English degree, boys sort of still just fun, the pursuit of fun and friendship kind of usurped the kind of escapism and absorption and solitude of reading. And then, to be totally honest, Hank, I didn't really, because now I read voraciously, but I didn't really rediscover that until my kind of early mid-20s. So I do feel like I have these quite big swathes of lost years, like probably about a decade of my life, maybe a bit more, where I kind of would have picked up a handful of books.
I was that way a little bit. There were definite, times of famine and feast, I guess you could say.
Yes. And actually, I don't think, I'm often chastising myself that I'm not reading more and that I'm not honing my writing craft more. I'm friends with lots of writers who they do like parallel reading. So they're making sure that they read all the classics. They're making sure they're reading like the canon of Middlemarch. And then they're also doing Philip Roth. And then they're also doing the hottest new book that's coming out week on week, either here or stateside. And then they're also like watching these long lectures on how to plot the perfect story. And they're going on writing workshops. I do often get nervous that I'm not really in that phase. I'm not really doing that at the moment. And there were big parts of my life where I wasn't doing that. I have been a bit kind of geeky about that stuff before, and just thought that by osmosis, if I absorb as much amazing writing as possible and as much contemplation and theorizing on what makes good writing, then by proxy it will be impossible for me not to write something good. But increasingly, and this is very kind of romanticized and cliche, but I think it is romanticized and cliche for a reason, is that the most important tool in a writer's toolbox is experience. And to have experience, to have like a full Technicolor, dirty, dangerous, boring, exciting, multi-cast member life, that means you have to be away from your desk and your books and your computer and your screen quite a lot. That means that you have to be cultivating relationships and friendships. It means you need to be traveling. It means you need to be, at the cinema, sitting, drinking a coffee one day for 4 hours, just looking at people. So I kind of give myself less of a hard time now, because I think that the living for me and the learning and the watching and the observing and the mistake making has become really, really an important part of the writing.
I completely agree with that. People will tell you that there are two crucial elements if you want to be a writer, and I think Stephen King probably distilled it down as best as anyone when he said that to be a writer you need to read a lot and you need to write a lot. And I like to add a third to that, and that is to get out and be with people and absorb humanity and watch those conversations, watch how people interact. What does body language look like? Those things are crucial to a writer, and I love that you do that as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's the people thing, as you say. I think that's the important thing. I think the idea of the writer's life being one of isolation, I've never quite been able to get my head around that, because I think for me, so again, because I'm in this quite unusual, I've never written a novel before, and I'm in this new place of honing that skill and learning about what that construction is like. But I just now find it even more completely insanely baffling how many writers, how many novelists I love claim that the way that they wrote their novel is they had to go to the Hebrides and be in a stone cottage with no electricity and no phone or whatever for like 6 months. I really take my hat off to them, because I now probably have like a neurotically active social life since I started my novel. And cynically, a lot of that is because I need the material. I need to go out. When I'm embroidering an entire world of made up people and made up, experiences, I can see it in my pages when I have 2 weeks of not really going and talking with people. And then I can really see it when I've had a couple of weeks of hanging out with some of the most interesting, curious, hilarious people that I know. Sorry, that's the very scenic sounds of Camden in North London. And I think, and actually it's been very interesting for me with the novel. I mean, I've done screenwriting before as well, so I knew this to an extent. But I thought while I was writing my novel that there would be like bits inspired by things I've heard or things I've experienced or felt. But really there will be a lot of things that are created from nothing, that I just come up with. Like, I build all the materials myself. And I don't know if this is true for other writers. I'd be very interested to know. The biggest lesson I've actually learned is nothing has come from nothing. Absolutely nothing. Every every kind of throwaway funny line, every character name, every location that they come from, every problem in their relationship, every plot point, when I really examine it and I think, where did I get that from? It's always from something. It's never for me, it has to come from a petri dish of some sort of tiny culture. And that could be from something I've experienced, or from something a friend experienced, or something I heard on the radio, or something I heard about a celebrity. But for me, nothing comes from nothing. So writing in this kind of vacuum cipher for me is so detrimental for my process.
I wonder, Dolly, that you just kicked off a whole array of imagination as you're talking about that process. I wonder if those people that can isolate themselves for 6 months and write a novel, I wonder if they tend to be more outliners and maybe have a story planned already before they really get into the writing. Because I tend to kind of be in that other camp, the fly by the seat of your pants, or a gardener, as George R.R. Martin might say, and which is much more appealing to me. But and I kind of thrive on constant interaction during the writing process. So and I completely understand what you mean. Like, there may be a scene that I have envisioned in my mind, and then we may go to a dinner party or something that night, and then tomorrow when I come back to the computer, that thing that I originally envisioned has taken on such a more dynamic range and more ideas and possibilities that if I would have just locked myself up in my writer's closet, that story wouldn't be what it wound up being.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because, a part of, excuse me, there's always been a part of me that's wondered if maybe the way that my brain works, so the channel from my brain to the page in a realm of fiction, maybe the reason why it always has to come from something is that my background is writing reality. So I've always been a journalist. I wrote this memoir, which was nonfiction. I also my first big job when I was 22 was I was a story producer for a big structured reality TV show over here, which is like our version of something like The Hills. And I was the storyliner. So I do often wonder that, I wonder if I'm just so used to metabolizing reality into a smoother shape that maybe that's what happens in my fiction. But I think you're right. I think that there are lots of different, because actually when you think about it, there are people who write fantasy and that's coming from nothing. Although now, sorry, I'm now contradicting myself. I remember listening to an interview with J.K. Rowling, and she said that every name in Harry Potter came from something. And I remember she said that it was a documentary I was watching with her, and she was in the church where she grew up in the village she grew up in. And in the book, the visitor's book, she opened it and then she suddenly slammed it shut, and she said that she'd forgotten a name of one of the villains in Harry Potter. She had completely stolen from one of the congregation of this childhood church. So this stuff, I don't know, I think it's all got roots, personally.
Oh, yeah.
I really do.
So going from this kid who had the compulsion to record everything and to kind of turn life into story, if you will, to working, I believe you said about 22 as this story editor for this television show. How did you wind up with that job? Was it always just a natural foregone conclusion that you would work in storytelling of some sort?
I think, so my degree that I did when I went to university, I did initially did drama, and I think that was because I always thought I'd be writing plays and screenplays, and then I did a year and a half of that degree course, which was nothing to do with writing plays and screenplays, and I had rather lofty ideas that it would be. And in fact, it was much more about me wearing sort of karate pants and balancing sticks on my fingers and, I don't know, waving my hands in the air, pretending to be a tree. Literally every cliche you can imagine about what a drama student is, that's what my degree course was. So I then switched it over to English. And the whole time I was doing various things for student newspapers, and then journalism, I became much more interested in journalism. And so I did a journalism master's. And then the way, so yes, sorry, as a long convoluted answer to your question, yes, I think I always knew I would be doing something in storytelling. I didn't know exactly what. And then the way I got that job was real luck, actually, because the TV show started in the UK. It had its first series. And I wrote these reviews, week by week reviews of the show, for no money, for just a kind of online magazine, just because I didn't mind not being paid, because they gave me, 900 or 1,000 words a week and said, write what you like. So that's like a dream for a 22-year-old. And then And then the last column that I wrote of that series on the last episode was like a joke letter to the producers saying, I've loved this show. I think this is what you need more of. This is what you need less of. And I obviously never thought anyone would read it. It was just like, here's how I would do series 2. And then little did I know, the owner of that production company found it online and printed it out and took it to the final kind of wrap-up meeting at Channel 4 at the broadcaster and said, look, this girl thinks this is what this random 22-year-old online blogger thinks this is what we should be doing. And apparently they just all kind of, not all agreed with it, but they thought there were some interesting ideas or some kind of funny ideas in what I had to say. And then the week afterwards, someone called me from a production company and said, would you come in for an interview? And then they gave me and I'd never worked in TV at that point. I was just working at newspapers and magazines, again, for kind of on internships for no money and living at home with my parents. And then they said, we'll give you an episode storyline to see how you go, because they knew I was very inexperienced. And then I did that, and then I stayed on for 4 series.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a magic story. I was very lucky.
And you've worked in journalism and as a columnist, as you mentioned. Looking back now on that time, doing all of that different, all of those different types of writing, I can obviously see where kind of earning those chops, writing benefited you in the memoir, the writing of the memoir that we're talking about today, Everything I Know About Love. But as you're now, I'm really fascinated by the novel that you're writing now, kind of really switching gears from what you've been doing. How do you feel like that time as a journalist, as a columnist, and all of those types of writing have informed your novel writing, and what tools do you feel like you picked up that are helping you today?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I do think that all kind of writing forms, even if you're copywriting, I do think they all teach you a different type of discipline, which is always going to be useful in other areas of writing. So for me, I mean, when I was working on Made in Chelsea, that's the name of the show. It's like a very glossy, kind of high-end structured reality show that was kind of like The Hills, like looked a bit like Gossip Girl, that kind of relationship drama show. And I just don't expect you to have watched it, Hank. That's why I gave.
I have teenage daughters, if that helps. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But yeah, so when you're watching those programs, there's this very kind of, nebulous, fuzzy definition of what's reality and what isn't. And I obviously will not go into the very boring details of of how we make it, but basically everything is everything is dictated by reality. So per episode, I would kind of put it into a structure of 4, maybe sometimes 5 storylines that we thought would develop across 4 parts of this 1-hour TV show, and then make sure per part we were hitting kind of the biggest story, the A story, that there wasn't most, that should be, predominantly scenes for the A story. And just, it was almost quite mathematic, really. And then what would happen is it would change a million times, because it would be completely dictated by what was going on in their real lives. And I think that gave me 2 skills that I'm now really grateful for as I write my novel. I think the first is I am much more relaxed than lots of other writers I know. Sorry, it's a very big boast. I'm very stressed out and neurotic about lots of other things about writing. But one thing that I'm much more relaxed about is stuff changing. So I handed in the first half of my novel before Christmas, and I had done a very similar narrative structure that I'd learned on Chelsea, a very basic narrative structure that everyone's kind of familiar with, of A, B, C, and D stories, and how you resolve all of them and what place of importance they are in the story and how you kind of pace them all. And my lowest story in the mix, my D story, my editor said she was very happy with what I handed in. And then my lowest story in the mix, she said, I don't think that's going to work. I think you need to scrap that. And I think come up with something new. And I was totally fine about that. and I just went, okay, give me 2 weeks. I need to rethink this. And then I went back with a brand new start. She took me out for lunch. I pitched to her scene by scene. This is what I think this is my new idea. And she said, great, fine. And then I had to scrap everything I'd done so far on it and then go back to the beginning and sort of literally replant, take out passages in chapters 2 or 3 and then put in the beginning of like this new story. And I was totally okay with that. And lots of writers were quite stressed out when I told them that and said, oh, I think I would have found that really difficult. And I do think that's like one of the like great lessons I learned on working on a structured reality show, where it would change so many times, where you couldn't be precious about your original ideas, is that I think the thing that we're taught at school, which is like a very ego-serving lesson, which is a very ego-serving sort of doctrine to carry with you, is that your intelligence and your skill is based on how good your original vision is and whether you can stubbornly see it through exactly as you imagined it. And if it has to change a lot, then it means somehow you've really fucked up and you're not as skillful as you should be. And I just think that is such a dangerous attitude to have when you're creating something. And I think that, I don't get a doomy feeling when someone says, oh, this needs lots of changes. Obviously I prefer it when it doesn't, but I feel tiredness around that sometimes, like, oh, I'm going to have to do this again. But what I don't feel is panic that it's not going to be good.
Well, and that's also why one of the dumbest questions you can ask a writer is, where do your ideas come from? Because ideas are everywhere, and you just have to learn to not be married to some and be open to the possibilities, because the story is everywhere. Totally.
I totally agree. But it's something I've had to, and when you really notice how hard driven that is into a writer's mind.
Yeah.
Have you ever written with someone else?
I have, and I'm not a big fan of it, honestly.
Yeah, I think it is much more difficult, but something that I really notice when me and my best mate write together, we write scripts together sometimes, and we've both had to really examine how much sometimes I would guard and defend my idea or my original idea with like this completely unnecessary sanctity, which I didn't even believe in, but because I was told that basically, it's like when you think about any movie that you've watched where it's about a visionary, some kind of exciting building string music will play as they get the idea, and they say in a very fast, exacting, precise way exactly what they see the thing turning out to be, and lo and behold, it turns out to be exactly that thing. So I think that it's so an exercise of ego rather than anything else. So I think I had to get so much better with my writing partner of being like, do I really think this is the only way this thing could go? Or am I taking this as a criticism of my skill if it doesn't go exactly how I originally stubbornly said it would?
Yeah, the old writer's ego. If we could solve that problem today on this podcast, I think we could probably just shut it down.
I tell you what, Hank, I am not the woman to solve that problem, as that is a problem that plagues me every single day.
And all of us. That's if there's we've done 815 episodes of this show, and that is kind of the predominant theme is getting out of our own way. If we could do that, then things would be so much easier.
That's reassuring to hear.
Yes, for sure. Well, let's talk about the book that's out here in the States, everywhere today. Everything I Know About Love. It's got this really, fantastic cover where you've got the text written out. Everything I know about parties, dates, friends, jobs, life, and all those are scribbled out, and all we're left with is love. Dolly, you're in the midst of this great career, and things are going well for you. What was it that compelled you to tell your own story in this memoir? I'm always fascinated by when folks write memoir about where they find the story thread. Because a day by day log entries in your journal would not be fascinating. But when you have found the narrative structure for your own story, how did that come to you, and what was the original motivation to tell your story?
Do you know what I think the interesting thing is that, which I hadn't realized until I was writing this book, memoir is a very specific type of nonfiction, of narrative-driven nonfiction, and it's so different to, as you astutely observe, it's so different to straight autobiography, because really what memoir is, I think, personally, good memoir, is I think the narrative structure is not so much determined by plot, beat by beat plot as we know it. It's determined by the exploration of a theme. So there are lots of important things that happened in my life from my child. There's barely anything about my family in my memoir. And that's because there are two main themes of the book. One of them is a kind of coming of age, finding of self, battle with demons, identity crisis, which is, it's a very familiar 20-something malaise, which is something that I was working through. And then the other theme is the theme of great love and support and strong long-term relationships, which was about friendship for me. So it's about growing up, and it's about friendship. And to be honest, I didn't really work out those themes. I didn't pitch it as a kind of thematic book that was delving into the nature of self and the nature of all different types of love. I think I just pitched it as a book about my 20s. And then I just decided to look at the funniest and most important stories of that time, which was basically kind of studenthood until, it ends at 30. So spanning about kind of 12 years. And I just wrote them down, and I wrote them almost as kind of separate stories, and then I worked on kind of linking them up. And then it was actually only in when I was writing the last chapter of the book, I went back and looked at every single story I'd written and just thought, right, what is this book about? What am I tying together here? What is the thread that runs through all of this? And that's when I realized that what it really was about was friendship, because in every single story I had written, and on every single page, basically, there was this kind of band of female friends that were very important to me, who were growing up with me, and we were all working out in that kind of first flush of adulthood, of womanhood, what kind of women we wanted to be. And really, that's when I realized at the last hurdle that this book was a love letter and a love story, but it was to friendship rather than to romance. And actually, because I wrote a dating column for 2 years in a big kind of newspaper supplement here. So I think a lot of people assumed, because I was writing so much about the pursuit of romantic love, I think a lot of people assumed that the book would be about romantic love, and I kind of thought it would be too. I remember my book editor, saying to me, it would be great if you could fall in love by the final chapter.
I'll get right on that.
Maybe I will. And then obviously I didn't, because I'm a single girl in London, and falling in love in London as a single girl is an incredibly difficult task. So it was, I think it wasn't until, as I say, it wasn't until the last moment that I realized that it had all been brewing. It had all been tying together without me really realizing it.
What's interesting to me is, as writers, as novelists, there are many times where a character on the page embodies a lot of our own experiences, our quirks, our most embarrassing situations, but we can hide them in character. We can even hide them in the least likely characters, where we can still express this life experience, but in a way that no one really knows that it's us. In a memoir, that is not only difficult, it goes against the nature of memoir, is to put yourself out there, raw, naked, just, there it is. There's the story. As you're writing this, what is that thought process like for you, in trying to decide which experiences you're going to share, how deeply you're going to share, do those things ever cripple you as a writer?
I mean, they do now. It's totally crippling now. I write a column still that's a kind of personal column, but it's a bit of a nightmare for my editors, really, because I won't write anything proper about my personal life, and I'm incredibly tentative about what I say on socio-political stuff, because I've seen over and over again how pack mentality can turn, particularly on female writers, and how the kind of dissection of, what's the terrible character? What's all the character flaws of this person on the page that we can deduce? Let's look in the ink of every single line to work out what a good or bad person they are. And I've seen that really kind of ruin the otherwise incredibly fulfilling writing careers of lots of writers. And it's something I'm, to be totally honest, completely petrified of now. And so, because I just have lots more eyes on me now, and I have lots more people who read me and know who I am now. So now I am completely crippled by it, to the point where I don't see how I could write nonfiction in the future, really, at the moment, because it just feels like I would be too self-conscious and I would be too scared. And that's the absolute opposite of what you want when you're writing. And it's why now I just love writing made up shit, because I just can have characters behave badly or mess up or think, dubious things or have various quirks, and I can write it in the safety of saying, well, it's not me, it's them. But to be totally honest, I don't feel any shame around everything I know about love. And I love that book. I'm really proud of it, and it's really changed my life, truly. But I do hank sometimes when I have to do readings or write about it. I do pick it up and open it up, and I don't know how I ever felt comfortable enough to write it. I don't get it. I truly don't get it. I'm like, I'm so nervous about public opinion now that I didn't even say publicly on my news podcast that I do every week who I voted for in the last election. For the first time ever in my life, I've always been so open about who I vote for. Suddenly it just felt too dangerous. So that's the level that I'm at now. And then I go back and read this book, and it's talking about basically every mistake I have ever made in my youth in technicolor, kaleidoscopic, unashamed detail. And I think the truth of it is I could only ever have written that book at 28. And when I wrote it, the book kind of charts at the end of it. There's a very kind of dark, muddled period, as there is for lots of people, I think, in their 20s, where I'm kind of wading through a lot of bad habits and demons and dysfunctional relationships that I write about in full. And then I went into therapy like a year and a half before the book came out. And I did a lot of kind of examination, and I got much better and much healthier and much more grown up very quickly. And then that just emboldened me in this very beautiful way that I'm now very jealous of when I read the last chapters of Everything I Know About Love. I would like to be that girl again, because she seems very, very sure of everything she's saying. And that's what I was. I felt like I had come through the wilderness of my kind of very messy youth, and I'd come out the other side with an understanding of what's important, what isn't, who I was, who I wasn't, and who I loved. And I think I could only ever have written a book that personal and that open with that level of self-belief, that almost blinkered level of unconscious self-belief. And to be totally honest, a woman who basically thought that the book would sell 5,000 copies at most. If anyone had ever gone back to me and said, this is how many languages it's going to be translated into, this is how many copies it's going to sell, I might not have written in quite so much detail about quite so many ex-boyfriends.
Well, the book has obviously found itself a phenomenal audience in the couple of years that it's been out on your side of the pond. It's spawned a book tour where you've the what I know about Love Live, I think it was called, and yeah. I think I even saw that you were working on maybe a screen treatment for it, that possibly this could turn into a television series.
Yeah, that's still in development, but yeah, that could be a possibility.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from readers? Like, why do you feel like this book, your story, your actual story, has resonated so deeply with readers, and that has to help you when looking back on this to think that maybe there's a side of you that is grateful that you shared as deeply as you did?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, first and foremost, I think writing about female friendship really resonated with a lot of people, and not writing about friendship as something that happens before you fall in love, but writing it as falling in love, writing about, the girl who I talk about in the book a lot is a girl called Farley, and we're knocking on a 21-year relationship with each other now. That is a lot of growing up together. That's a lot of tragedy together. That's a lot of triumph together. That's adventure. That's, broken hearts. That's lost family members. That's a marriage. That's a long, 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 long time. And that is worth examining. That's a story worth telling. And yet it's not a story you really read a lot, because I think that women's relationships with each other are still sort of denigrated and belittled and patronized. So to kind of write that story as a marriage story, almost, of a love story so far, and all its various difficulties as well as its kind of glorious moments, I think it goes, this will sound maybe like a little bit grandiose and a bit deluded, and I hope it doesn't, and I hope your listeners will understand what I mean by this. I think that what that book, it's gone so beyond now my personal experiences. I think what that book is, I have girls come up to me and talk about how the book, they sent it to their Farley in their life or their Dolly in their life. I have girls, about once a week I'll send signed copies of the book to girls who've written into my publisher and said, my best friend has just got divorced, or my best friend is about to get married, or my best friend has just been diagnosed with cancer, and this book is something that's very important to us, and it's kind of the love that you have for Farley really is a reflection, and the history you have is a reflection of the history we've had since, from girlhood, from school girlhood to adulthood. And when a book, when it takes on a life like that, it's almost like floated off so beyond what my story is, and like a beautiful big hot air balloon. It's been fired up by the love and the stories of so many other people now. I think that's the main reason why it resonated so much with people, rather than anything very specific about my story.
One thing that I love about the book and your story is that even, when you're reading about some of, as you describe, some of your biggest mistakes in wrestling with demons, that it's not just bleak. You have a real way of injecting humor into each situation. A lot of times self-deprecating, which I absolutely love, because if you take yourself too seriously, you're going to be a great bore. And I try to practice self-deprecating humor in my life, all the time. And other people that do are usually much more interesting people to be around. How important is that to you? And listening to some of your podcast and things that I've done, this seems to be very much a part of your nature and your personality. How important is humor to you, and how important is being mindful to not take yourself too seriously, even in really serious situations?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a quality that we should all strive for, and that does not mean kind of self-criticism or underestimating yourself, but to be able to realize that, to be able to have perspective about yourself and your story, and to be able to be good-humored. I mean, being funny and being around funny people is just like the most gorgeous, important thing to me, and it always has been, and probably to a fault, really. I will basically do or say anything to get a group of people to have a laugh. But I think that Caitlin Moran, who's a very brilliant British writer, who has done really well over in America as well. She wrote a memoir called How to Be a Woman. I remember she's much more political than I am, actually. She's very much more brave than I am as a writer. And I've heard her talk about how important and completely necessary it is that she uses humor when she's spreading her message, because she said to be worthy, or to be self-aggrandizing, or to be, lecturing is just so easy to do, and it's so boring for everyone else. And if there's a way that you can tell a good story, or have a really good message, or move people in a way that's parceled like a gift in the beautiful wrapping paper of wit and silliness and mischief, it's just the most gorgeous thing to receive. I think it's such a gift that you can give and receive, to be able to communicate wrapped up in humor. So yeah, for me, that is really important. And I that's the writing that I love as well. And actually, interestingly, I won't go into the specifics of it, but the storyline of my novel that I ended up cutting out, I realized one of the reasons it didn't work is it was me taking myself too seriously, which I try very hard to avoid. And it was a storyline that was a lot about something I was angry about in my personal life. And I went back and reread it, and I thought, it's just not very enjoyable. It's not that nice to read. And I think venting, ranting, lecturing, those are quite easy. Those are quite easy verbs, I think. But entertaining and warming and, titillating, I think that's the real craft for me.
The book is called Everything I Know About Love, a memoir. It is available everywhere now. Today, when you're listening to this, Dolly, this has been so much fun talking. I've got links to the book in the show notes of this episode, where people can run out and buy their copy in paperback or hardcover or audiobook and Kindle edition. Any way that you consume books, you can get your hands on it. Dolly, I know that you do so much other stuff, as we alluded to earlier. Is there a place online where people can connect with you and dig into all the great stuff that you do?
Yes, you can go on to dollyalderton.com, where there is a slightly long self-penned biography about everything I've done. And you mustn't feel guilty if you only scroll to the first 3 paragraphs. And there's lots of information about all the kind of various podcasts and writing projects that I've done there. And I'm also one of those people who tweets nonsense 10 times a day. So you can find me on Twitter at Dolly Alderton.
The best. Dolly, I also believe that Gimme Shelter is the best Stone song ever.
That's because you're a genius, and I could tell that from the moment that honeyed Mississippi voice started speaking to me.
That's right. I love it. Dolly, thank you for being so generous with your time. and we're going to send everyone to see you pick up their copy of the book and get plugged in with all the stuff that you're doing. Thank you so much for taking time to come on.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War.
The near future. Humanity's only hope of survival entered the solar system at nearly the speed of light. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come, then the probe would annihilate itself. There would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the Sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, it landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy, one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed "Answer Me" over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. "When did I get this app?" he thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" "You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right. Doc. Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen," the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. "Come. Now." Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to his ear, Mark stopped and looked around before deciding how to continue. Spiked ocotillo plants looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. "You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire?" the caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.